The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Sweet and Simple Cafe, casting long shadows across the handcrafted wooden tables Laura had personally selected 6 months ago. She stood behind the counter, watching the first customers of the day savor their artisanal coffees and fresh-baked pastries. The gentle hum of conversation mixed with the whir of the espresso machine, creating the exact atmosphere she'd dreamed of when she and Jessica had first discussed opening their own place. "Another perfect morning," Jessica said, appearing beside her with a fresh tray of cranberry scones. Her long dark hair was neatly tied back, and her green apron bore the cafe's logo, a design they'd stayed up late one night perfecting over wine and laughter. "Who would have thought we'd actually pull this off?" Laura smiled, but something nagged at the edges of her consciousness. The previous night's cash count hadn't added up, again. It was the third time this month, and the discrepancies were getting larger. She'd spent hours going over the receipts, checking and double-checking the numbers until her vision blurred, but the result was always the same: money was vanishing. "We need to talk about the books," Laura said quietly, keeping her voice low as a young couple walked past, hand in hand, heading for their favorite corner table. Jessica's shoulders tensed slightly, but her smile remained fixed. "Can it wait? The morning rush is about to start, and I promised Mrs. Henderson I'd have her birthday cake ready by noon." Before Laura could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Mike, their regular from the law firm down the street, walked in wearing his usual charcoal suit and tired smile. He'd been one of their first customers, and over the months, his daily visits had become a comfortable constant. "The usual?" Laura asked, already reaching for a large cup. "You know me too well," Mike replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How's business?" "Growing every day," Jessica answered quickly, turning toward the kitchen. "I've got prep work calling my name. Laura, can you handle the register?" Laura watched her friend disappear through the swinging doors, noticing how Jessica's normally confident stride seemed hurried, almost nervous. She'd known Jessica since college. They'd shared dreams, secrets, and countless late-night conversations. They'd supported each other through failed relationships, career changes, and family crises. Opening the cafe together had seemed like the natural progression of their friendship, a way to build something meaningful while working side by side. But lately, something felt off. It wasn't just the missing money. Jessica had been taking more private calls, stepping outside to answer her phone, and Laura had caught her staring at the register with an odd expression more than once. "Earth to Laura," Mike's voice cut through her thoughts. "You okay? You seemed miles away." "Just thinking about numbers," Laura replied, forcing a smile as she handed him his Americano. "Running a business is more complicated than I imagined." "Tell me about it," Mike said, leaning against the counter. "My firm handles small business litigation. The stories I could tell you about partnerships gone wrong." He trailed off, taking a sip of his coffee. "But hey, you and Jessica. You're different. I've never seen two people work together so seamlessly." Laura nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to what she needed to do. The cafe was their dream, but dreams needed protection. That afternoon, while Jessica was handling the delivery, Laura made a call to a security company. The hidden camera was installed the next day, disguised within the vintage clock above the register, the same clock Jessica had found at a flea market and insisted would be perfect for their decor. That night, after they'd closed and Jessica had left, Laura sat in her office, staring at her laptop screen. Her finger hovered over the button that would start the video playback. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, and Laura thought about trust, about friendship, about the fine line between suspicion and betrayal. With a deep breath, she pressed play, unaware that what she was about to witness would change everything. The video footage played in stark black and white, turning the warm interior of Sweet and Simple into a film noir set. Laura's hands trembled as she watched Jessica, her best friend of 15 years, methodically empty the register after closing. The movements were practiced, efficient, suggesting this wasn't the first time. Jessica carefully counted out several $100s, tucking the bills into her wallet before replacing the remaining cash and closing the drawer with a gentle click that seemed to echo through Laura's speakers like a gunshot. "Damn it, Jess," Laura whispered to the empty office, her coffee long cold beside her keyboard. She'd watched the footage 3 times now, each viewing cutting deeper than the last. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m., just yesterday, after Laura had left early for her mother's birthday dinner. Jessica had volunteered to close, insisting Laura shouldn't miss the family celebration. The next morning, Laura arrived early, her stomach in knots. The cafe's windows were still dark, the street outside quiet except for the occasional passing car. She unlocked the door with unsteady hands, breathing in the lingering scent of coffee and vanilla that usually brought her comfort. Today, it made her nauseous. Jessica arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a box of fresh flowers for the tables, yellow daisies, Laura's favorite. "You're here early," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "I thought you were taking the morning shift off." "We need to talk," Laura replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "In the office. Now." The smile slipped from Jessica's face. She set the flowers down carefully, smoothing her apron with hands that Laura noticed were shaking slightly. They walked to the office in silence, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Laura closed the door behind them and turned to face her friend. "How long?" "What do you mean?" Jessica's voice was small, defensive. Without a word, Laura turned her laptop around and pressed play. The footage began to roll, the black and white images stark and undeniable. Jessica's face drained of color as she watched herself stealing from the register. When the video ended, the silence in the office was deafening. "Laura, I can explain," Jessica began, tears welling in her eyes. "It's Mark, my brother. He's sick. The medical bills." "Don't," Laura cut her off, her voice sharp with pain. "Don't you dare use your brother's illness to justify this. You're my best friend, Jess. We built this place together. If you needed money, why didn't you just ask? Would you have given it to me? $3,000, no questions asked." Jessica's voice took on a desperate edge. "Mark's treatment isn't covered by insurance. He needs specialized care, and I didn't know what else to do." Laura felt the anger she'd been holding back begin to surface. "So you decided stealing was the answer? How much have you taken in total? And don't lie to me, not again." Jessica sank into the office chair, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know exactly. Maybe $8,000. I was going to pay it back, I swear. Once Mark's treatment was finished." $8,000. Laura's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "That's not just taking a little extra from the till, Jess. That's systematic theft. That's betrayal." Outside the office, they could hear their first employee arriving, the sound of chairs being moved as the cafe prepared to open. The familiar morning routine continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind the closed door. "I'll pay it back," Jessica said quickly. "I'll take out a loan, sell my car, whatever it takes." "Please, Laura, you can't go to the police. This would ruin everything, the cafe, my reputation, Mark's treatment." Laura stared at her friend, seeing a stranger in the familiar face. "I need to verify your story about Mark. And I need you to take a leave of absence while I figure out what to do. You don't trust me?" Jessica's voice cracked. "Trust?" Laura laughed bitterly. "You've been stealing from our business for months. No, Jess, I don't trust you. Not anymore." As Jessica left the office, shoulders hunched and wiping tears from her face, Laura noticed Mike watching from his usual spot at the counter. His expression was concerned, questioning. She wondered how much he had observed over the past months, what signs she had missed that might have been obvious to an outsider. That evening, after the cafe closed, Laura sat alone at one of the tables, staring at her phone. Jessica's brother's number was on the screen, her finger hovering over the call button. Outside, the street lights flickered on, casting long shadows through the windows. She thought about all the times Jessica had talked about Mark's illness, the worried phone calls she'd taken, the days she'd asked to leave early for hospital visits. Had it all been a lie? Or was there a kernel of truth buried beneath the deception? The bell above the door chimed, making her jump. Mike stood in the doorway, his tie loosened after a long day at the office. "We're closed," Laura said automatically. "I know," he replied, walking to her table. "But I think you need someone to talk to. And I think there's something about Jessica you need to know." Mike pulled out a chair and sat down, his expression grave in the dim evening light. The empty cafe felt different after hours, larger, somehow, and full of shadows. Laura could still smell the lingering aroma of the day's last batch of coffee, mixed with the lemon cleaner they used on the tables. "I should have said something sooner," Mike began, loosening his tie further. "But I wasn't certain until today. I saw Jessica last night, around midnight, at the Grand." Laura's hands tightened around her phone. "The casino? I was there meeting a client, he's going through a messy divorce, and that's where his wife's been spending their savings." Mike's face was troubled. Jessica was at the high-stakes poker tables. She looked different. Not like the person we see here every day. She was with some people I recognize from my work, the kind who prey on desperate players, offering loans with impossible terms. The revelation hit Laura like a physical blow. She thought about the careful way Jessica had counted the money in the security footage, the practiced movements, the increasing frequency of the thefts. "How long have you known?" "I've seen her there 3 times in the past month," Mike replied. Each time, she looked worse. Last night, she was playing like someone with nothing left to lose. "I watched her lose 5 hands in a row, but she kept betting. That's when I knew I had to tell you." Laura stood abruptly, walking to the window. The street outside was quiet, the occasional car passing through pools of streetlight. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and drawn. "I called her brother today," she said quietly. "He is sick, chronic kidney disease. But his treatment's been covered by insurance and a medical grant for the past year." She used his illness as a cover story. Worse. Laura turned back to Mike, her voice tight with anger. She used her brother's real suffering to hide her addiction. "I talked to Mark for an hour. He had no idea she was stealing money or gambling. He thought the cafe was doing well, that we were expanding." She laughed bitterly. He was proud of her. Mike stood, walking to the coffee bar. With practiced ease, he began making 2 espressos, a habit he'd picked up from watching Laura and Jessica over the months. The familiar sound of the machine filled the silence. "The loans she's taking from these people," Laura said slowly, "they're not legal, are they?" Mike shook his head, carefully placing a cup in front of her. "Loan sharks. They start friendly, offering easy money with seemingly reasonable terms. Then they add fees, raise interest rates, threaten to expose their victims' secrets. I've seen it destroy families, businesses, entire lives." Laura sank back into her chair, the reality of the situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. The cafe's finances were precarious enough without $8,000 missing. If Jessica was taking loans from criminals, "I have to protect the business," she said firmly. "But I can't just abandon her. She's sick, Mike. Gambling addiction is a disease." "It is," he agreed. "But you can't help her if she won't admit she needs it. And right now, your priority has to be keeping this place afloat." Laura's phone buzzed, a text from Jessica, "Please call me. I can explain everything. Mark's treatment really did need extra money. I was trying to help him. Please believe me." "She's still lying," Laura whispered, showing Mike the message. "Even now, when she knows I've talked to Mark." Why can't she just tell me the truth? Because the truth means facing what she's become, Mike replied gently. And sometimes that's harder than maintaining the lie. Laura stood again, this time walking to the register. She pulled out the day's receipts, spreading them on the counter. Help me with something. I need to go through every transaction for the past 6 months. If I'm going to save this place, and maybe help Jessica, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. They worked late into the night, poring over receipts, bank statements, and inventory records. The more they dug, the worse it looked. Jessica hadn't just been taking cash, she'd been manipulating inventory numbers to hide larger thefts, creating fake supplier invoices to cover her tracks. Around 2 in the morning, Laura's phone rang. Jessica's number flashed on the screen, but the voice that spoke was male, unfamiliar, and cold. Is this Laura Mitchell? We need to discuss your partner's outstanding debts. She suggested you might be willing to help arrange payment. Mike reached over and ended the call, his face grim. Don't answer any more calls from her number. These people, they're dangerous. We need to be smart about this. Laura stared at the phone as it began ringing again. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb, its headlights illuminating the cafe's interior. Through the window, she could see Jessica in the passenger seat, her face tear-streaked and desperate. The driver remained in shadows, but his silhouette suggested both size and menace. What have you gotten us into, Jess? Laura murmured, watching as the car idled at the curb. Mike was already reaching for his phone, his legal training kicking in as he assessed the situation. But Laura knew that whatever happened next would go far beyond the realm of normal business law. The car's horn blared once, sharp and demanding in the quiet night. Laura's hand moved toward the door, but Mike caught her arm. Wait, he said urgently. There's something else you need to know about Jessica, something I discovered while looking through these records. And it changes everything. Mike pulled a folder from his briefcase, spreading documents across the table as the car horn blared again outside. When I started looking deeper into the financial records, I found something that didn't add up. The initial investment in the cafe, Jessica's half. It never existed. What are you talking about? Laura stared at the papers he was laying out. She put in 50,000, just like I did. I saw the transfer. You saw a transfer, yes. Mike pointed to a series of transactions. But look at this. The money came from an account that was emptied the next day. It was a shell game, Laura. She borrowed the money for 24 hours, just long enough to show you the deposit, then moved it out again. You've been the only real investor all along. The revelation hit Laura like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, her mind racing back to the beginning. Jessica had been so excited about their partnership, so full of plans and ideas. Had it all been a lie from the start? There's more, Mike continued, his voice gentle but firm. The reason she needed to fake her investment? She was already in debt to these same people. She used your dream of opening a cafe as a way to get access to legitimate business accounts. They've been using her to launder money through your business. Outside, the car's engine revved menacingly. Through the window, Laura could see Jessica pressing her hands against the passenger window, her face a mask of desperation. The fake supplier invoices, Laura whispered, the pieces falling into place. The inventory discrepancies. It wasn't just about stealing cash, was it? Mike shook his head. They're using the cafe as a front. Those invoices. They're paying for shipments that never arrive, creating a paper trail for illegal funds. Jessica's gambling debts gave them the leverage they needed. She's not just an addict, Laura. She's become their tool. Laura's phone buzzed again, another text from Jessica, please help me. They say they'll tell Mark everything. They'll destroy the cafe. I never meant for any of this to happen. How much? Laura's voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. How much has been laundered through my business? Mike grimaced. Based on what I've found so far. Close to 200,000 over the past 6 months. Your legitimate business is being used to clean their casino profits. The car horn sounded again, longer this time. A sharp rap on the cafe's window made them both jump. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in an expensive suit, stood outside, gesturing for them to open the door. His smile didn't reach his eyes. If I don't help them, Laura said slowly, they'll what? Burn the place down. Report us to the authorities for money laundering. They can't risk exposure, Mike replied, already pulling out his phone. But they might try to force you to sell, create a crisis that makes you desperate enough to take their offer. Once they own the cafe legally, they can use it however they want. Laura stood, her decision made. Call whoever you need to call. I'm not losing everything I've worked for because Jessica got in bed with criminals. Laura, please. Jessica's voice was muffled through the glass. She'd gotten out of the car, ignoring the driver's attempt to grab her arm. Just talk to them. They have a proposal. We can fix this. Step away from the window, Mike said sharply, his phone to his ear. My contact at the FBI is on his way. We've been building a case against these people for months. When Jessica started showing up at the casino, I recognized their pattern. You knew. Laura turned to him, anger flaring. You've been watching this happen. I couldn't tip my hand too soon, Mike explained. We needed proof of the money laundering. But when I saw how bad Jessica's gambling was getting, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let them destroy you both. The driver was at the door now, his face hardening as he saw Mike on the phone. He reached into his jacket, and Laura caught the glint of metal. Back room. Now. Mike grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the kitchen just as the sound of breaking glass filled the cafe. The driver had smashed through the door's window, reaching in to unlock it. Laura, wait. Jessica's cry was desperate. You don't understand. I had no choice. They have Mark. They really have him. That's why I couldn't tell you the truth. They took him 3 days ago. They say if I don't get them the cafe's accounts tonight. Laura froze in the doorway to the kitchen, her heart stopping as the implication sank in. Behind her, she could hear the door opening, heavy footsteps entering her cafe. Mike was pulling her toward the back exit, but her mind was racing, calculating. If Jessica was telling the truth about Mark this time, they had minutes to make a decision that could mean life or death. The driver's voice carried across the cafe, smooth and professional despite the violence of his entry. Let's all calm down and discuss this like business people. After all, we have a very simple proposition. Sign the cafe over to our holding company, and all debts are forgiven. Mr. Chen's brother goes home unharmed. Everyone wins. Mike's grip on Laura's arm tightened. Don't listen. Once they have the cafe, they'll have no reason to keep any promises. But Laura was staring at Jessica's face through the kitchen doorway, seeing something there she'd missed before. Not just fear and desperation, but raw terror. The kind that only comes from knowing someone you love is in real danger. How do I know Mark is alive? Laura called out, shrugging off Mike's restraining hand. Behind her, she could hear sirens in the distance, but they seemed very far away. Whatever she decided to do, she had to decide now. Laura's mind raced as she assessed her surroundings. The kitchen's stainless steel surfaces reflected the emergency lights, creating an otherworldly glow. Years of running the cafe had taught her every inch of this space, including the panic button under the prep counter, installed during their first month of operation. She hadn't touched it in years, but she knew it still worked. They tested it monthly. Show me proof Mark's alive, she called out, stepping fully into the kitchen. I'm not signing anything without verification. The man in the expensive suit, he'd introduced himself as Mr. Reynolds, smiled thinly. Check your phone. A video message arrived seconds later. Mark Chen sat in what looked like a storage room, today's newspaper visible beside him. He looked pale but unharmed, his hospital ID bracelet still on his wrist. "Laura, please," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "Do what they want. Jessica was just trying to protect me." Mike moved closer to Laura, speaking in a low voice. "The FBI team is 4 minutes out. We just need to stall them." But Laura had already made her decision. She'd seen something in the video that gave her an idea, a desperate gamble, but maybe their only chance. "I'll sign," she announced, stepping forward. "But I want terms. This has to look legitimate, or the bank will freeze the accounts." Reynolds raised an eyebrow, studying her with newfound interest. "Go on. I know how much the cafe is worth, exactly how much. I've been tracking every number since we opened." Laura moved to the office, projecting confidence she didn't feel. "The real numbers, not the ones Jessica's been using to launder your money. If this is going to work, we need to make it look like a legitimate sale." Jessica's eyes widened at Laura's apparent capitulation. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I never wanted." "Not now, Jess," Laura cut her off, her voice sharp. She pulled up documents on her computer, watching Reynolds from the corner of her eye. "The cafe's true value, with all assets and projected earnings, is $450,000. Your laundering operation has actually been hurting its legitimate potential. A smart buyer would see that." Reynolds leaned against the doorframe, looking amused. "And why should that matter to us?" "Because," Laura continued, typing rapidly, "if you want to keep using this place, you need it to look successful. Not just on paper, but in reality. Right now, you're selling drinks to ghosts and paying invoices to shell companies. That works for a while, but eventually, it draws attention. What you need is a thriving business that can hide your operations in plain sight." Mike started to speak, but Laura silenced him with a look. She could hear sirens getting closer, but they weren't close enough. She needed more time. "The current ownership structure," she continued, pulling up more documents, "is complex. Jessica's name isn't actually on most of the crucial papers. Her initial investment, the one she faked, triggered a clause in our agreement. The money had to stay in the business account for at least 6 months, or her equity stake would be invalidated." Reynolds' smile faded slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that legally, I own this place outright. Jessica's technically been an employee since her investment disappeared. That makes this simpler, you only need my signature. But it also means we need to structure this carefully." Laura turned the monitor toward him. "Look at these numbers. The real ones." The sirens were very close now. Reynolds glanced toward the window, his hand moving inside his jacket again. "Enough games. Sign the transfer papers. Now. If you want this place to be worth anything, you need me to do this right," Laura insisted. "The documents are printing now. But first." She reached under the counter, pressing a sequence of buttons that made the cafe's security shutters begin to descend over the windows. "We need privacy for this transaction. Can't have anyone seeing us doing business at this hour." Reynolds whirled toward the windows, distracted by the mechanical sound of the shutters. In that moment, Laura's hand found the panic button. The effect was instantaneous. Silent alarms triggered at the police station and their security company. More importantly, the cafe's fire suppression system activated, not the sprinklers, but the sophisticated FM 200 system she'd insisted on installing to protect their expensive equipment. The gas began displacing oxygen from the room, setting off a piercing alarm. "What the hell?" Reynolds staggered, caught off guard by the sudden change in air pressure. Behind him, his driver began coughing. "FM 200, Laura announced calmly, already moving toward the back exit, pulling Jessica with her. "It's non-toxic, but I really wouldn't stay in here. And those shutters? They lock automatically when the system triggers." The only way out is through the back. Mike was already holding the door open. Through it, they could see emergency lights reflecting off the walls of the alley. The FBI team had arrived, positioning themselves at both ends of the narrow space. "You think this changes anything?" Reynolds snarled, but his confident demeanor had cracked. "Your friend's brother is at Mercy General Hospital," Laura finished for him. "That's what I saw in your video, his hospital ID bracelet." "The storage room you're holding him in?" "It's in the hospital's East Wing basement. I recognize the paint color and the supply shelves. My mother worked there for 20 years. She pushed Jessica through the door, hearing Reynolds curse behind them as the oxygen levels continued to drop. The FBI agents were moving in, their weapons drawn. "I had to know," Laura said to Jessica as they reached safety. "Had to know if you were finally telling the truth about something. So I gambled, just like you've been doing. Difference is, I played to win." Behind them, the cafe's windows lit up with red and blue lights as more police arrived. The night was far from over, but at least now they were playing by Laura's rules. 6 months later, Laura stood behind the counter of Sweet and Simple, watching the morning light paint patterns on the newly refinished floors. The cafe smelled of fresh paint and coffee. She'd spent the past week overseeing renovations, erasing every trace of that night's violence. The broken door, the scuffed floors, the damaged office, all replaced. But some marks couldn't be painted over so easily. "Your usual?" she asked as Mike walked in, his tie slightly crooked as always. He'd been at the courthouse all week, testifying in the case against Reynolds and his organization. The trial had made headlines, a criminal enterprise using small businesses across the city to launder casino profits. Sweet and Simple had been just one of many targets, but they'd been the ones to break the case open. "Actually," Mike said, settling into his usual spot at the counter, "I thought you might want to see this first." He pulled out a newspaper, sliding it across to her. The headline made her breath catch: "Casino corruption ring leaders sentenced. Local cafe owners quick thinking leads to major bust." "They got 20 years, Mike continued as Laura scanned the article. "The evidence from your security cameras, combined with the financial records we uncovered, gave the prosecution everything they needed. Reynolds won't be pressuring any more business owners." Laura set the paper down, her hand steady despite the memories it stirred. "And Jessica?" Mike's expression softened. The DA took her cooperation into account. With her testimony and agreement to enter rehabilitation, she got probation. "Her brother Mark is doing well, back home and recovering. He asked about you, by the way." Laura nodded, turning to make Mike's Americano. The familiar routine helped center her thoughts. "The gambling addiction counselor I spoke with said it could take years for Jessica to fully recover. If she commits to the program." "She is committed," a quiet voice said from the doorway. Laura turned to see Jessica standing there, looking both different and familiar. She'd lost weight, and her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something more genuine, more vulnerable. 6 months clean. One day at a time. Laura set Mike's coffee down, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that still needed to be said. "I got your letters." Jessica stepped inside, but didn't come too close. She looked around the cafe, taking in the changes. "The place looks good. Really good. I heard business is up." "Turns out running a legitimate operation is more profitable than laundering money," Laura replied, but there was no bite in her words. "The breakfast crowd especially. We're thinking of extending our hours." "We?" Jessica's voice held a question. "My new partner," Laura explained. "Sarah Chen, Mark's wife. She's a business consultant, helped me restructure after everything. She's also been instrumental in setting up our new program." Laura gestured to a small sign near the register that read, "Second Chances Initiative, providing employment opportunities and support for recovering addicts. Because everyone deserves a fresh start." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Laura, I'm not ready to forgive you, Laura cut in, her voice gentle but firm. The theft, the lies, getting involved with criminals, that was bad enough. But using Mark's illness as a cover story? Making me think my best friend needed help while you were gambling away our future. That's going to take time to get past. I understand, Jessica whispered. But, Laura continued, reaching under the counter, I talked to your counselor. She says having a routine, a purpose, can help with recovery. She pulled out a green apron, new, but with the familiar sweet and simple logo. We need help with the morning shift. 3 days a week, minimum wage to start. Sarah will supervise. Jessica stared at the apron, her hands trembling slightly. Why? After everything I did. Because 15 years of friendship doesn't disappear overnight, Laura replied. And because everyone deserves a second chance, but they have to earn it. She placed the apron on the counter between them. The job comes with conditions. Regular counseling sessions, GA meetings, financial oversight. One slip, and it's over. No third chances. Mike watched the exchange silently, a small smile playing at his lips. Outside, the street was coming to life as the city woke up. A line was already forming at the door, the cafe's reputation had only grown since the story broke. Jessica reached for the apron slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. I won't let you down. Not again. No, Laura agreed, turning to greet their first customers of the day. You won't. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the steam rising from fresh brewed coffee. Laura moved through the familiar routine, grinding beans, pulling shots, creating the perfect balance of flavors. She'd learned a lot about balance over the past months. Business and compassion. Justice and mercy. Trust and verification. The cafe was full now, buzzing with conversation and life. At a corner table, Sarah was reviewing their latest financial reports, her expression satisfied. By the register, Jessica was carefully counting change, each movement watched by cameras she knew were there. And at the counter, Mike raised his cup in a small salute. Laura smiled, feeling the weight of the past 6 months settle into something manageable. Sweet and Simple had survived betrayal, violence, and transformation. The coffee shop she'd dreamed of had become something more, a place of second chances and new beginnings. The taste was different, more complex than before. But maybe, she thought as she watched Jessica successfully navigate her first morning rush, that wasn't such a bad thing. Some things, like trust and friendship, had to be rebuilt slowly, one cup at a time. But with the right ingredients, the right care, and the right amount of time, even the bitterest brew could become something worth savoring.